because sun is very important in this energy transition. Without solar energy, we cannot really make the transition that we will be talking about. So a small poem written by Robert Louis Stevenson in the praise of sun. Great is the sun, and wide he goes through empty heaven without repose. And in the blue and glowing days, more thick than rain, he showers his rays. Though closer still the blinds we pull to keep the shady parlor cool, yet he will find a chink or two to slip his golden fingers through. Meantime, his golden face around, above the hills, along the blue, round the bright air with footing true, to please the child, to paint the rose, the gardener of the world, he goes. Thank you. Now I request Dr. Umays Abdur Rahman, who is the co-coordinator of Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition, to come and provide you the housekeeping rules for this two-day session. Over to Dr. Umays.
Thank you, Badr Saab. Assalamu alaikum ji. Hello and good morning, everyone. This is Umays Abdur Rahman. I'm coordinator of Pakistan Renewables Energy Coalition. And I feel honored to welcome you all to the second edition of Asia Energy Transition Summit. Before we begin, as Badr Saab mentioned, I would quickly highlight few of the housekeeping tools so that we can run the day smoothly. So first things first, I would request all of you to please keep your phones on silent mode. Secondly, if you need help with anything, our team members are outside this hall also. In the hall also, you can see us with this badge. So just in case if you need any assistance. Tea and lunch breaks will be announced. So please follow the timing so that we stay on schedule. And now the most important housekeeping rule. For the question answer sessions, we would be using Slido app. So in the beginning of each session and also when the question answer session will begin, the QR code will be displayed on the screen, so you are requested to scan it and kindly send in your questions by typing them. And again, a humble request that kindly mention your name and organization while typing in your question. Furthermore, the QR codes of this Slido app are also available at our reception desk, so you can also access them from our reception desk. Secondly, about the Wi-Fi, the internet, you can see the QR codes available on the walls, and you can also access the QR codes at the reception desk. We also have some of the hard copies of agenda available at reception desk, but nevertheless, we would encourage you to use the QR code and kindly access the agenda items on your mobile phone. Later in the day, I would again be here to announce some of the more housekeeping tools regarding the breakout sessions. We will have 3 breakout sessions today. And I guess it's better that I now hand over to the next speaker. Thank you for your attention, and I wish you all a very productive day. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Umays, for describing the rules in detail, and we hope that all the participants will respect those. And if you have any problem, you can always contact the organizing committee. Now I request Dr. Tariq Judoon, who is the provost of LUMS, for a welcome address. Tariq Judoon has been leading this entire conference effort from the front. So over to Dr. Saab.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Distinguished guests, colleagues, and partners, good morning and welcome to LUMS. It is a privilege to host the second Asia Energy Transition Summit in partnership with the Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition and the Alliance for Climate Justice and Clean Energy. We are honored to have with us leaders from government, academia, industry, civil society, and international organizations who bring depth, experience, and commitment to this important conversation. Last year's inaugural summit established an important regional platform for examining the challenges and opportunities inherent in Asia's energy transition. Its success also reaffirmed our belief that universities have a responsibility to convene stakeholders, facilitate evidence-based dialogue, and contribute to national and regional policy making with clarity and independence. In this spirit, LUMS, through its academic departments and institutes, continues to play a central role for research and policy engagement in Pakistan, including advancing work on grid modernization, renewable integration, electric vehicles, and energy system resilience. We meet at a time when global and regional energy dynamics are shifting rapidly. Asian countries, including Pakistan, face difficult choices shaped by geopolitical uncertainty, climate pressures, and rising affordability concerns. These challenges demand thoughtful approaches to governance, financing, and technology adoption. Throughout the day's sessions, we will explore themes that are particularly relevant: the future of South-South cooperation, the influence of trade and compliance frameworks on clean energy pathways, Asia's evolving role in the global transition, and the importance of community-led innovation. Pakistan's own shift towards solar energy, captured in the documentary Pakistan Solar Rush, offers a timely example of this momentum, and we shall see this later in the day. For Pakistan, the stakes are significant. Our reliance on imported fuels, and our exposure to climate impacts make the transition both urgent and consequential. At the same time, the rapid people-driven adoption of solar technologies signals an opportunity for reflection and coordinated action. As a university, LUMS remains committed to supporting this transition through research, policy engagement, and partnerships that help translate ideas into action. I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to our partners and all the participating speakers and delegates for their collaboration in making this summit possible. We look forward to 2 days of constructive, thoughtful deliberations that help chart equitable and effective energy transition pathways for Pakistan and Asia. Thank you once again, and welcome to LUMS.
Thank you very much, Dr. Judon, for your wonderful welcome remarks, as well as your wonderful and very generous support to the organizers of this conference. Without your support, this would not have been even possible. Since our keynote address speaker is running a little late, so I would like to take this opportunity to introduce you to the 2 organizations that are collaborating with LUMS Energy Institute to organize this summit. One is Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition, and the other is Alliance for Climate Justice and Clean Energy in Pakistan. So the second alliance, ACJCE, came into being in 2020 when Pakistan was had shifted in a big way towards fossil fuel-based energy generation, and climate change impact were becoming highly visible across various areas of Pakistan, and especially in the marginalized areas which did not have much representation in power and economic dynamics in the country. So the founders of this alliance thought that it was important that we do some research and also do some advocacy based on the evidence that we can collect from various parts of the country, especially the ones that are very vulnerable to climate change, and find out if the government's existing policies or its future plans are having any negative climatic impacts on these areas, and especially in the power sector. So that was the reason how and why this alliance came into being. As of now, this alliance is comprised of more than 10 organizations that are based in various parts of Pakistan, and they are all working on a just energy transition and climate justice for the people of Pakistan who are vulnerable to both an unjust energy transition and an unjust share of climate vulnerability. The second alliance, Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition, came about almost at the same time in 2021 and 22, and its main function was to promote the renewables in Pakistan. But while promoting the renewables in Pakistan, this alliance wanted to and always wants to make this distinction that renewables should not be confused with other technologies, other false solutions, including hydropower in Pakistan. And we have seen hydropower's massive negative impacts of Pakistan. I do not need to go into detail to emphasize those, but this coalition was specifically meant to promote technologies that are technologically safe, socially compatible with Pakistan's conditions, economically viable, and of course, future looking, not backward looking. And this alliance also comprises of more than 15 organizations based in various parts of Pakistan, and they all collect a lot of evidence from different parts of the country and then advocate with policymakers both in Pakistan and outside Pakistan for the promotion of renewable energies. One major achievement of this alliance in recent times has been that it successfully, along with ACJC, of course, not without ACJC, that it successfully campaigned for the reduction of tax on solar imports from 18% that the government proposed in this budget to 10%. So these are some of the things that these two alliances have been doing. Now I request Amara Aslam, who's been a senior member and senior coordinator for both these alliances over the last couple of years. She will now give you a presentation on the conference theme and its agenda. Over to Amara.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you for the introduction, Badesab. So when we set out to create this summit, to create an initiative that would foster South-South collaboration, we had this idea and we had our inaugural Asia Energy Summit last year in the same hall with some of you present, some of you not here, and we're very glad you can be here today. So when we So the theme of this year's summit, and we've scaled it up a little considering the global energy diplomacy and the governance that is, and the changing landscape that is happening all over the world in the energy transition. So our theme this year is the global energy governance and the emerging role of clean energy transition, especially in the context of Asia, that includes South, Central, and East Asia, Southeast Asia, sorry. So why is the Asian continent so important? Because if we look at the statistics, 60% of the world population resides in Asia, and 48% of the global energy demand is also hosted here. But there's also a flip side, because the two top 10 emitters, 2 out of them, which are China and India, are also situated in Asia. So what does that say for us as a region, as a continent? So our objectives this year, again, as Dr. Tariq and Badr Sahab has mentioned, are to take stock of the progress that we have made towards the energy transition journey as Asia, as a region, and then also through our global commitments, through our advocacy, through our collaborations with the Global North as well. And we just collectively take stock, come together, and then look at the energy transition that is happening and look at case studies, especially the solar rush in Pakistan that has been happening and how it can be scaled up to the regional level. And then to explore localized transition pathways that are rooted in indigenous knowledge, that look into local solutions instead of following the global north blindly using their technologies. Rather, we just develop our own technologies that are suited to our geography and our regions. And then to assess the evolving trends and their implications for Asia and how we can access finance, how Asia can exercise its leadership in the energy transition. What outcomes we're seeing from this energy transition or from this Asia summit in terms of the energy transition for Asia is to develop a strategic roadmap through a charter that we create what we created last year. We are also going to feed our conversations that are going to be happening over the next 2 days, and I'm going to run over the agenda in a while. So we are going to feed that into a strategic plan that is going to be shared with our partners all across Asia and figure out a way for enhancing climate and energy justice through a community-centric and very inclusive and equitable energy planning process. And then to amplify the voices of civil society, which have been neglected, but we have made our cases at every platform that we can find. And then to facilitate a comprehensive stock taking of the progress around the region through energy transition, leading enhanced collaboration among Asian countries through South-South cooperation and also with the global North. And then to influence the policy making across the Asian region, and then to make cohesive efforts in the Asian region to figure out a way to make this energy transition very just and equitable. So what we're going to go through is we have loaded plenary sessions for both days. Our first plenary session today, which Badasab is going to be announcing in a while, is on multilateralism at the brink, a new world order for Asia's energy transition. And we have a distinguished set of speakers for that. And then we're going to have parallel sessions on both days, which are for day one, it's going to be navigating tariff and non-tariff barriers for Asia's energy transition. We are going to look at the UN framework and in light of the new COP30 frameworks that were just released, and then from global to regional, and how Asia is at the heart of energy transition. For day two, we have another plenary, which is going to be focused on the beyond fossil fuels, moving away from fossil fuels, moving towards a just energy transition, which are emerging landscape, financing opportunities, and potential false solutions that we're going to see. And then the parallel sessions are going to be around distributed generation and how we can scale renewable energy. Then how can we address climate debt overall in this transforming economy, and then financial systems in a way to support this energy transition. And then finally, we're going to look at the grid and flexible infrastructure. We will also have closing plenaries and participation from parliamentarians and policymakers, which we can address through this collective effort to, as CSOs, as activists. And that is going to be a rundown of the agenda. So I will hand it over to Badr Saab now. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, Amara, for giving us this detailed rundown of the conference. Now I request Dr. Fayaz Chaudhry to come and explain this agenda a little bit more. Dr. Fayaz Chaudhry, as most of you already know, is the senior advisor of LUMS Energy Institute, which is the host organization of this summit. And he's also worked in very senior capacities with the federal government in the electricity system of Pakistan. Over to you, Dr. Saab.
Yes. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum, everyone, and good morning. Here we have been hearing about renewable energy and energy transition. And up till now, what we have been, in the introduction, what we saw that there is a supply side we are talking about. What energy source should we use? Under renewable, if we call it, solar and wind and other, alternative energy sources, especially the, small hydro projects. So they will come under renewable energies. But somehow, as a government of Pakistan, what we did, even large hydro projects are considered as renewable. So people can debate on it, either it is renewable or not, but definitely it is a clean energy. So the after effects, can be again considered or debated. Either it is due to the dams that we have built or some run-of-the-river projects. So again, it's all supply side. And because I know better, statistics also on the power system, and especially in Pakistan. So 60% plus energy that we produce in the country is clean. Now, why we are under some of the challenges, I'll try to, remove some of the myths. Badr Saab introduced, the two associations or organizations. One was Alliance for Climate Change, and the other one is Pakistan Renewable. So why LUMS Energy Institute and what it does? I will briefly introduce. So basically, LUMS Energy Institute we established in 2018, and the objective was in entirety as an independent think tank for the country. And what we miss is integrated resource or energy planning. We should not be talking only on the supply side, but also the kind of load we supply. Should be even producing that energy, which is wasteful, which we will waste. So what we, feel that demand side cannot be ignored, which we have been ignoring for many, many years. I'll give you an example. Our winter peak demand is about these days 12,000 megawatt. But in like 8-7 years ago, it was not even 11. But our summer peak, even 9-10 years ago, when we decided for this, power solution, that was over 26-27,000 megawatt. So now the demand in winter has only increased by maybe 1,000 megawatt. It goes to 12,000, but the winter summer peak has crossed 30,000. So what sort of demand is this? Has the country overnight started, building new factories? The answer is no. So what type of load are we supplying? So 30 minus 12 is about 18,000 megawatt. So what is this demand? This is purely cooling load demand. What do I mean by cooling load? Means air conditioning and fans. And why do we need air conditioning? And why? It's all for comfort, naturally. But are there alternative ways or efficient ways of cooling yourself or making your environment better? So we have not been researching or identifying solutions. But we are talking about only supply side. So to supply that, actually renewable energy, along with maybe some sort of battery storage, may help in making meeting that peak demand, but primarily because it is a variable renewable energy. So you do not know when the wind is going to blow, or in the evening solar won't be available. So only it can provide energy, but not the capacity. So for capacity, you need to install some firm generation capacity, which comes through nuclear, comes through maybe hydro, and it comes through some sort of fossil fuel generation. What will it entail? It will force you to build those capacities, but they will remain underutilized. So that's how what the country has been facing. That we installed about 40,000 plus megawatt of capacity to meet that peak demand of summer, but the utilization is less than 20%. Oh, that's where your tariff gone through the roof. And our capacity payment is now more than 2/3 of your operating cost. So you have an asset sitting out there underutilized, but you are paying. I give the simple example. A bus of maybe 50 passenger capacity, if it is the loading factor or the passengers would on average 35 to 40 if they travel on that bus, naturally your fare would be very reasonable. But if you bought that 50 passenger bus, only 10 passengers sit on it, so what you are going to do to make it financially sustainable? So naturally you will charge hectic amount. So that is exactly what is happening in the power sector. So when we talk about energy, so we must consider each and every aspect. So do not ignore the load factor. So what we need to do going forward as a solution, make our housing energy efficient so that they require less energy, because it's all, the kind of construction we have. So I call it, you're cooling your walls, nothing else. Thank you very much. I was kind of a fill-in because Minister Saab was still, on his way. So I said I shall give you another perspective, as opposed to only, yes, we need to, on the supply side, we need to be 100% renewable. But with the technologies currently we are in, it is relatively difficult because the battery still is kind of expensive. We still need to have, our firm energy somewhere of some sort, either in the form of hydro or whatever. So, but the demand side cannot be ignored. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. You have been a very strong champion of demand side management, and you have always advocated for energy efficiency and energy conservation. So thanks a lot for sharing your views. We're just waiting for our keynote address speaker, and he is almost here. Will be entering the hall in 1 minute, maybe. Okay. As they say in English, power corrupts, but wait for power sometimes irritates. So please bear with us as the minister comes in. We warmly welcome Professor Ehsan Iqbal, the Federal Minister for Planning, Development and Special Initiatives. And we also thank all of you for waiting with bated breath and quiet anticipation for his arrival. Now I request Professor Ehsan Iqbal to come and deliver his keynote speech for this two-day energy summit on Asia's transition towards renewables. Over to Dr.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Distinguished guests, global energy leaders, development partners, scholars, and distinguished delegates from across Asia, good morning and assalamu alaikum. It is a profound honor for me to join you today at the Second Asia Energy Transition Summit. I commend LUMS and the organizers for convening a platform that is not only timely, but essential. Today's dialogue is not about any abstract policy. It is about the future of our planet, the resilience of our economies, and the well-being of billions of people. Ladies and gentlemen, humanity stands at one of the most consequential turning points in history. Climate change has moved from forecasts to reality, from research papers to human tragedy, and from distant risks to daily experience for millions of people. Heat waves are intensifying, glaciers are melting, and Pakistan is one of the most affected countries because we have the third pole in the northern Pakistan. Food systems are straining and natural disasters are becoming more frequent and ferocious. The economic stability we once took for granted is now vulnerable to climate shocks occurring with unprecedented speed and scale. Asia, home to 4.7 people, has become both the engine of global growth and the front line of global climate vulnerability. What we decide today, how we produce energy, how we build resilience, how we innovate, will determine the trajectory of our continent and ultimately the future and fate of this planet and our coming generations. Few countries illustrate the tragic injustice of the climate crisis more starkly than Pakistan. In 1922, catastrophic floods described by the UN as a monsoon on steroids submerged 1/3 of my country. More than 33 million people were affected. Villages, crops, schools, hospitals, and roads were washed away, and also the gains we made in SDGs since 2015 were also washed away in the flood waters. And the tragedy of the flood was that it hit the poorest of the poor regions in Pakistan. So it produced ultra poverty and ultra malnourishment. The nation suffered over 30 billion in losses, not including the psychological and social scars that still remain. As if it was not enough, again in 2025, Pakistan endured another sequence of climate-induced calamities through cloudburst monsoons. Glacial lake outburst floods, extreme heat waves, riverine flooding, and violent storms, compounding vulnerabilities, reversing development gains, and stretching the resilience of our people, society, and economy. Yet Pakistan contributes less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. This is the essence, ladies and gentlemen, of climate injustice. Those who contributed the least to global warming are suffering the most from its consequences. No climate policy is credible unless it recognizes this inequity and responds with fairness, urgency, and solidarity. Our experience has made one truth unmistakably clear. The world cannot fight 21st century climate disasters with a 1944 financial system. The global financial architecture was designed after World War II to rebuild economies, not to respond to planet on fire. Today, climate vulnerable countries face impossible choices: rebuild after climate disasters or fund essential social services, repay debt or invest in adaptation, pursue a clean energy or struggle to survive the next climate shock. The current system offers loans when grants are needed, slow processes when urgency is essential, and high financial cost when survival demands concessional terms. If climate change is a shared global responsibility, then climate finance must also reflect shared responsibility. We therefore call for a bold transformation of the global financial architecture, including a fully operational and adequately funded loss and damage fund, expanded access to concessional climate finance, simplified mechanisms for rapid disbursement, and debt restructuring of global south and swaps tied to climate resilience, a reimagined role for multilateral development banks as catalysts, not creditors. Without these reforms, the world will struggle to meet Paris targets, and climate vulnerable countries will remain trapped in cycles of disasters and debt. Despite these challenges, Asia stands at a historic moment of opportunity also. We possess the world's largest solar belt, fastest growing renewable energy markets, deepest talent pool in engineering and sciences, rapidly expanding green technology ecosystem. Asia can lead the global clean energy revolution by advancing technologies that reduce emissions, improve efficiency, and enhance energy security. A green, resilient Asia is indispensable to a stable and prosperous world. Pakistan is fully committed to transitioning towards a sustainable, low carbon energy future. Under Udan Pakistan, our national transformation framework, we are placing renewable energy and climate resilience at the center of our development strategy. Our pathway is built on three strategic pillars. One, rapid expansion of renewable energy. We are accelerating solar and wind deployment to significantly increase their share in our national grid. This will reduce dependence on imported fuels, lower electricity costs, and strengthen energy security. And Pakistan does represent one of the success stories of the recent past in making a transition to solar energy. Two, modernization of the national grid. A green energy transition cannot succeed with outdated infrastructure. We are modernizing the transmission and distribution network to make it resilient, flexible, and capable of integrating large-scale renewable inputs supported by digital technologies and smart systems. Three, energy efficiency as a national priority. The cleanest energy is the energy we save. We are launching cross-sector efficiency initiatives for industry, transport, agriculture, and households to reduce waste, improve competitiveness, and make growth more sustainable. To unlock the full potential of renewables, Pakistan is investing in short and long duration storage, battery systems, pumped hydro, and innovative solutions. This will stabilize the grid, support off grid communities, and ensure reliable energy supply. As the digital economy expands, energy demand from data centers is rising rapidly. Pakistan is promoting green data centers powered by renewable energy, equipped with cutting edge cooling and efficiency technologies, ensuring that digital transformation aligns with climate goals. Pakistan has significant deposits of minerals essential for battery technologies and clean energy supply chains. We are developing this sector responsibly and sustainably, ensuring environmental protection and benefit sharing for local communities. No country, developed or developing, can transition alone. We call upon multilateral partners, climate finance institutions, and private investors to collaborate with us in scaling renewable energy, building storage infrastructure, and modernizing our grid. Pakistan is already attracting investment in large-scale solar parks and wind projects. We are expanding incentives, strengthening regulatory frameworks, and promoting green bonds and blended finance to mobilize capital at scale. Distinguished delegates, the energy transition is not a national project. It is a collective human responsibility. No border can stop a heat wave. No passport can protect from a flood, and no military can deter a melting glacier. Asia must lead the world by building regional grids and energy corridors, establishing joint R&D hubs for green technologies to leverage the pool of scientists and engineers it possesses, strengthening climate resilient infrastructure, creating shared mineral and EV value chains, and mobilize green finance collectively. If we act together, Asia can become the world's engine of sustainable growth. Let us be clear, the transition to clean energy is not just an environmental necessity. It is a moral imperative, an economic opportunity, and the defining cooperation challenge of the 21st century. We owe it to our children and to our future generations to build a world where prosperity does not come at the cost of our planet, where development is green, inclusive, and just, and where no country is left behind in the race for survival. Pakistan stands ready to lead, ready to partner, and ready to innovate, shoulder to shoulder with Asia and the world. Thank you very much.
I'll also request our international delegates to also come on the stage and join the group photo. Please. Okay. Dr. Lalufar Yasmin, Lady Nakpil, Kairos, Sunil Acharya. Sorry, I don't have all the names with me. So if I've missed any other name, please join without hearing your name from here. Decide that. Thank you everyone for joining the group photo and sorry for the inconvenience. Thank you, Professor. Now we'll take a short break of 5 minutes, and then we will start our plenary session. I'll not be doing any announcements anymore. So when the plenary session starts, our Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition's convener, Mustafa Amjad, will be your masters of ceremony and the host of the plenary session. So after this, over to you, Mustafa. Thank you.
Hello. Hello. Check 1, 2, 3. Hello, testing. Testing. Hello. 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 Check 1, 2, 3. Hello, testing. Hello. Hello, testing. 1, 2, 3. Hello, testing. Test. Hello.
Could I please expect everybody outside to come in? We'll be starting very shortly.
Thank you. ये जेब में डाल दूं? Sorry.
They're joining us online, 3 of them. Yeah. Hamza was supposed for settling in. I'll begin with this very important plenary that we have planned to kickstart things at Asia Energy Transition Summit 2025. We have our esteemed panelists. Assalamu alaikum, a very warm welcome to all of you. And I think we gather here under a title that is demanding a lot of honesty, and that is multilateralism at the brink. Sounds like words chosen for dramatic effect, but essentially it also describes the situation we are in as a globe, as the world. Just 3 weeks ago, we gathered in Belém. COP30 was conducted. This was supposed to be the implementation COP. And the outcome was pretty much in line with expectations. We got a commitment to mobilize $1.3 trillion per year for climate action. We got a tripling of adaptation finance. We got a just transition framework. And yet, despite all of that, more than 80 to 90 countries wanted a fossil fuel phase-out roadmap. But that didn't materialize, and this pattern is now very familiar. We see this year on year with every climate, convening at every climate summit. We get ambitious pledges followed by, implementation gaps wide enough to drive a cold train through, essentially. And that's kind of what has been the reality of the framework that we'll be discussing today. And nowhere in this gap is a region more consequential than Asia. Asia as a region is home to 60% of humanity. Amara said in a monologue, we're responsible for 50% of the global energy demand. We're also responsible for 50% of global carbon emissions. And this is the region which will determine whether 1.5C becomes a reality or a footnote in history. And not only that, I think it's also important that we also have to realize that we also have the largest emitters in the region and then the most climate vulnerable nations in the region. And often, we are the ones that are asking for a lot of climate finance. There are some that are still building their first coal power plants. There are others that are ready to decommission. And then we also have a few countries that are, receiving climate finance. There are also a few that are demanding climate finance. And then we also have a few that are doing both. And that's kind of, the reality of the international climate infrastructure and the architecture that we have. Bilateral agreements will never be a substitute for global climate action. We realize no single country can solve climate action or climate change on their own. It has to be a collective effort. And yet the architecture we built in the 20th century, the Bretton Woods, the UN framework, the rule-based international order, it's struggling under pressures it was perhaps never designed to bear. And nowhere is this more true than in Pakistan. The minister was rightly pointing out on some of the climate calamities that this region is facing. But that does not mean that, the people of Pakistan are not ready to transition. In fact, this is a region and an example where people have decided that, despite our constraints, it's not necessarily a hindrance to adopting clean energy. It's probably an incentive to adopting clean energy. And that's exactly the question before us today. It's not whether Asia can transition. It's whether the systems that we created a few years ago, a few decades ago, are they ready to support that transition or are they ready to obstruct it? And how do we actually go beyond this system to create something more meaningful that will allow Asia to transition in a more meaningful and equitable manner? I am again in awe of the panel that we've been able to gather here. I'll be more than fangirling today, but we have an excellent composition of people here, experienced, esteemed guests who have done it all. Of course, we have Dr. Shamshad Akhtar. Dr. Shamshad has navigated the corridors of the UN, the finance ministry, the State Bank of Pakistan. She was the first female governor of the State Bank of Pakistan. She has also served as the VP of World Bank. She has also served with Ban Ki-moon as Under Secretary General. And I think she's also currently serving as the Executive Secretary to UNESCAP, right? So again, she has all the experience that we need for such a discussion. In fact, she had a very important role in drafting the same climate infrastructure and architecture that we'll be discussing today. We have with us Dr. Pichamon Hyofentong. Dr. Pichamon chairs the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights. A stark reminder for us that energy transition must be grounded in justice and not just economics. We have Lady Nakpi, whose voice from the Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development has consistently demanded what the minister was echoing earlier, that climate finance should be reparations, not charity. It should be grants, not loans. Lydie is a teacher and a mentor to many in this room, but she's also a ray of hope to many back home in Philippines, where climate, where she's a soldier for those vulnerable to climate change and communities that are facing lots of climate disasters in the Philippines. We have Mr. Hamza Ali Haroon, who is the Regional Director of Climate Vulnerable Forum in V20. It's a coalition of 68 nations that are tired of being victims of the system and are now demanding to be architects of a new financial order, Hamza. And of course, he's been quite vocal in support of the CVF, of course, and helping a lot of countries develop their climate prosperity plans. And then we have Mr. Joo-Jin Kim, whose organization Solutions for Climate has cancelled over 4 gigawatts of coal power projects. Joo-Jin is a lawyer by trade, but I know for a fact that he's an activist now, who's securing youth-led constitutional victories for climate across the region. Some of the work that SFOC has done has allowed climate reparations to be discussed cross boundaries, and that's exactly what I would love to hear more from Joo-Jin today, and the work that they've been doing in ensuring that Asia has a cleaner future to boast. And under the guidance of Justice Syed Mansoor Ali Shah, Justice Syed Mansoor Ali Shah was the pioneer of climate jurisprudence in Pakistan. He called for the establishment of dedicated climate codes. He made sure that climate finance is right for a lot of us. And obviously, the perfect candidate to examine whether multilateralism can be reformed or whether it must be reimagined entirely. So I'll end there with the expectation that today we'll be discussing or setting the tone for the next 2 days, where we see what role the current infrastructure has to play in ensuring that this region is able to transition in a meaningful way, but also who will shape it, who will benefit from it, and more importantly, the institutions we rely on would act as midwives or act as obstacles. So I'll stop there, and with that, I'd like to bring into discussion Dr. Shamshad Akhtar. Dr. Shamshad, again, like I said, you have the experience of it all. You understand this infrastructure well. We recently had COP30, where we committed to mobilize 1.3 trillion annually. We've seen such commitments come time and again, but then again, at the receiving end, you've been there while negotiating with the IMF from Pakistan's end. You've experienced the corridors of the World Bank as well. What is it that needs to change essentially for Asia to be able to capture all of those commitments that we often see but do not materialize in implementation?
Sure.
Your choice, of course. Thank you so much. Please.
I would have expected more audience here, but never mind. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Assalamu alaikum to everybody. It's my first speaking role in LUMS. I have been here for different things. Multilateralism at the brink, a new world order for Asia's energy transition. Distinguished guests, of course, our distinguished panelists. In context of our planet's dynamics and its consequences, global and Asia energy transition is critical, I believe. Having witnessed firsthand in my international career and also domestic, evolution and complexity of multilateral cooperation from multiple vantage points, I stand before you with hope and urgency. Asia is world's largest greenhouse gas emitter, contributing over 50% of global emissions, driven by urbanization, dependence on fuel, industrialization, and fast economic progress. Cost of Asia's climate action is phenomenal. It requires $21 trillion by 2050 just to decarbonize energy sector. I've written the first comprehensive report under the sponsorship of the United Nations, which is the full compilation of issues of Pakistan. And later on, I did an Asia Pacific Climate, Finance and Dynamics report co-authored with the London SOS Center. So for those who may be interested in more substance, I'd be happy to give you links to that. First point that I'd like to make is that the fracturing global fault lines are stress testing the foundations of international cooperation in ways not seen since the end of Second World War. Faltering leadership and shifting commitments among global powers are straining global governance frameworks and cooperative arrangements that have underpinned development and climate action for decades. Yet, multilateralism has been and is resilient. The question is not whether cooperation will continue, but who leads it and what form it will take. For Asia, this is not a crisis, but a clarion call. Consider the paradox we inhabit. Geopolitical fragmentation threatens to slow decarbonization and has limited the diffusion of technologies and raised transition cost. However, China and Asia have emerged as undisputed center of clean energy manufacturing, deployment, and innovation. China's lead in renewable capacity at an unprecedented scale in recent years is a statement of where the capability and momentum now resides in the global transition. My second point, there is a great divergence between transition aspirations versus energy realities. JP Morgan's recent energy analysis offers a sobering reality check. Despite unprecedented investment, the renewable share of total final energy has risen only gradually. The transition should be measured in decades, not years. Why this disconnect between ambition and reality? McKinsey's Global Energy Perspective underscores the need for cost competitiveness and pragmatic approaches over aspirations alone. Their hard stuff catalog, grid modernization, critical minerals, hydrogen infrastructure, and carbon capture reminds us that physical constraints must be overcome. Analysis for Asia reveals both the scale of opportunity and the magnitude of challenge. The region could unlock trillions in revenue opportunity by 2030 from renewables and clean technologies, but must multiply annual investment on the order of trillions to align with net zero pathways. The infrastructure gap is staggering. I worked on in all of Asia. I was 15 years with the Asian Development Bank I could have stayed there for lot more number of years, but for Pakistan driving me back to become the governor of the central bank, I still regret it because I had a great career. I lost a lot of money of my pension, etc. So Asian Development Bank's energy transition mechanism pilots most advanced in Southeast Asia are expanding, with additional countries exploring participation. Flagship initiatives will need more predictable financing and stronger implementation strategies to reach breakthrough scale. My third point, it's urgent to finance the unfunded mandates. At COP29, developed countries signaled intent to increase climate finance. Figures discussed include at least $300 billion annually by 2035, with pathways to mobilize over $1 trillion from broader sources. Yet, Asia alone requires investment on the order of trillions to stay on track for net zero pathways. The gap between intent and delivery must be closed. My fourth point, our current climate finance architecture remains insufficiently fit for purpose. Let me enumerate the challenges and the fixes we need. First, scale and access. The Green Climate Fund and Global Environment Facility, I was part of the system then, and we laid this foundation in a lot of expectation, now still operate below the scale required with excess pathways that need simplification, capacity support, and predictable replenishments. Multilateral development banks, where I have spent 30 years, their capital adequacy and lending headroom frameworks and hybrid capital needs to be scaled up, and guarantees be deployed to scale lending for long gestation energy transition projects. Third point under the category is risk and bankability. Requires private capital flows to where returns are certain and risks are minimum. We must crowd it in through guarantees for first loss tranches, credit enhancement, standardized power purchase agreements, and robust procurement. Program integration and uptake is underway. The innovative instruments like the IMF's Resilience and Sustainability Framework have been introduced, but its uptake depends on building capacities, project pipelines, and expanding eligible windows to accelerate deployment. I worked with the fund during my whole career, but most of all, when I was finance minister, where we said climate has to be an integral element of the IMF's program, and we asked for a facility. Developing Asia faces fiscal constraints, energy security imperatives, and large climate finance requirements. Besides reforms, co-designed solutions with partners are critical to reinforce macroeconomic stability and climate ambition. My fifth point, move South-South cooperation from rhetoric to reality. Talk a lot, but reality is very different. If existing architecture is not yet fit for purpose, Asia must build its own complementing, not replacing global pathways. Asia has the resources, so I look to right and left. The foundations already exist in Asia. The Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank has mobilized substantial capital for regional connectivity and green infrastructure. The Asian Development Bank's Energy Transmission Mechanism, ETM, financing scheme allows for working models for ETMs. Like support for Pakistan to scale and accelerate the transition from coal and other fossil fuels to clean and renewable sources. Regional grid interconnection initiatives in ASEAN and South Asia demonstrate the technical feasibility of cross-border energy cooperation. My sixth point, to go further and faster, I propose 3 pillars for renewed Asian multilateralism. Pillar 1, an Asian Climate Transition Fund. We need a dedicated, well-capitalized regional financing mechanism, a genuine pool of patient capital for energy transition in emerging Asian economies. Capital structure of it is critical. We should mobilize sovereign and private capital with explicit first loss tranches provided by the Asian multilateral development institutions. We need to have defined use of proceeds, concessional financing for early coal retirement, grid flexibility and its modernization, utility scale storage, and renewable deployment. Project preparation. We were in G20. I was Policy Sherpa in Development Finance, Sherpa of the United Nations for almost 6-7 years. They talked about projects, prepared projects. Technical assistance facilities were offered to build bankable pipelines, addressing the commitment to implementation bottleneck. What has Pakistan done? Nothing substantive. Governance and criteria. Clear, transparent standards that balance climate ambition with development priorities overseen by a coalition of Asian MDBs and sovereign contributors. Pillar 2, regional technology cooperation and supply chain integration. Remember, Asia is the hub for exports. China's leadership in solar manufacturing, batteries, and wind is pivotal for scaling. We should leverage regional strengths while diversifying supply chains, advancing common standards, and fostering joint manufacturing, R&D, and workforce development. My Pillar 3 proposal, just transition frameworks with real teeth. Implementation must be community-centric, equitable, and locally empowered. We need district-level planning and develop transition plans that begin at the district, not just in the capital cities. We need social protection and reskilling, establish reskilling funds and community benefit compacts for workers and communities dependent on fossil fuel. How else will you distract them? Energy access and affordability. Ensure reliable, affordable energy as we decarbonize, recognizing that many still lack dependable electricity. We have to empower our local governments, provide performance-based grants and project preparation facilities to provinces and municipalities, supported by transparent dashboards. I'm fed up of the National Finance Commission's debates. Everybody has National Finance Commissions. What's the mystery? There is rules-based approach to defining the federal provincial allocations. After all, federal government raises funds, but also we have to empower provinces and local governments. to raise. And there's politics between the provinces. And I can speak, give a separate lecture on that, but never mind. Let me not get too emotional about it. Seventh, how is Pakistan's pathway to be promoted from laggard to laboratory?
Yeah.
Pakistan's recent IMF engagements, the extended fund facility and RSF I talked about, offer a framework, however imperfect. The RSF focuses on strengthening public investment processes, improving water resources management, enhancing intergovernmental coordination on disaster financing, and improving climate risk disclosure. But implementation is everything. Here is what Pakistan must do and what it can teach the region. Bridge federal-provincial divides I just talked about. Our 18th constitutional amendment decentralized power, but fragmented climate governance. The 2025 NDCs update must inaugurate binding provincial climate action plans with ring-fence budgets and timelines aligned to the enhanced transparency frameworks. Under the seventh point, Pakistan needs to adopt a portfolio approach to energy security. Modern grids can integrate high shares of variable renewables with appropriate flexibility mechanisms and storage. Pragmatic pathways should phase out the most polluting assets first, while building infrastructure for a diverse, resilient mix that safeguards base load needs and affordability. Mobilize private capital at scale. Government resources will never be sufficient. We need regulatory frameworks that make green investment attractive, contract sanctities, transparent tariffs, standardized power purchase agreements, predictable procurement, and streamlined approvals are critical. We have to rebuild credibility through transparency, deliver robust monitoring, reporting, and verification under NDC 3.0, establish real-time dashboards, independent audits, regular public reporting to build international confidence and unlock finance. To conclude, Asia's energy future is promising, but depends on how geopolitical realities shape it. The China-Pakistan economic corridor delivered critical generation capacity and grid assets. It also introduced long-term fiscal commitments through capacity payments that require periodic optimization and transparency as demand patterns evolve. Pakistan and China can jointly calibrate contract structures, aligning capacity payments with system flexibility, renewable integration, and affordability, while safeguarding bankability. Shifting trade policies and technology restrictions complicate choices, and that's what's happening between the US and China trade and tariff wars. Europe's carbon border adjustment mechanism is moving from transitional to financial phases, with obligations commencing in 2026. Decarbonizing export-oriented industry is now a competitiveness imperative. Countries will not accept our exports if we do not illustrate what we are doing to ESG standards, etc., etc. Similar mechanisms could proliferate. The emerging architecture of climate clubs and green alliance risks creating a tiered system where countries with resources and capabilities accelerate ahead. while others are left behind, not for lack of ambition, but for lack of access to technology and finance on fair terms. Asia's response must be strategic unity without conformity. We need platforms for coordinated negotiations in international forums alongside flexibility for diverse national pathways that reflect different circumstances, capacities, and development stages. I have gone with Ban Ki-moon, with the present Secretary General, Tony Guterres, and with a lot of other people to different platforms advocating this a long time back. And I remember we were trying to convince the various leaders. And I was with the United States President together. We were talking to. And when we reached India, Mr. Modi said, I don't believe in this. Everybody was shocked. There was no conversation he wanted to have. So I know of some countries that have no appetite. They want to throw the cross-border emissions to Pakistan, or for that matter, all the adjoining, because climate doesn't respect borders. We have to respect our own borders and have collaborative arrangements. The final point, the new multilateralism principles for the road ahead. To build a fit-for-purpose order for Asia's energy transition, I propose several foundation principles: equity with accountability, differentiated responsibility must be matched with transparent commitments and robust monitoring. The era of pledges without performance must end. Localization with standards, solutions tailored to national and subnational contexts should operate within regional and global standards that enable trade, technology transfer, and mutual recognition. We need flexibility with ambition. Transition pathways should be pragmatic about sequencing and timing while staying aligned with planetary boundaries. Public leadership with private partnership. Governments must set direction and enable conditions while mobilizing private investment through genuine risk-sharing mechanisms. South-South cooperation and North-South accountability. Regional cooperation complements, not replaces, the responsibility and obligations of developed countries. Climate finance is obligation and investment, not charity. So call to action is critical. We stand at an inflection point. The old multilateral order is fracturing, and a new one has not taken shape in this interregnum. As Gramsci observed, myriad morbid systems appear.
Yeah.
But I always have a problem pronouncing, also create space for innovation, new forms of cooperation, and leadership from expected quarters. Asia, home to 60% of humanity, as was talked about, and the fastest growing economies, the most dynamic clean energy sectors, and tragically, some of the most severe climate vulnerabilities must seize this moment. The summit's theme asks whether multilateralism is at the brink. My answer is yes. The old multilateralism is indeed at brink, but from its rubble, we can build something more fit for purpose, more inclusive, more action-oriented, more accountable, more effective. The window for limiting warming to 1.5% narrowing, the window for building the multilateral cooperation that can deliver on climate commitment is also narrowing, but it has not yet closed. Whether we seize this opportunity or squander it will determine not just our energy future, but the future of billions of Asians who depend on us to get it right. Let us therefore move from diagnosis to prescriptions, from pledges to implementation, from fragmentation to focused cooperation. The stakes could not be higher. The time for action is now. Thank you.
Thank you. No worries. Don't worry about it. No worries at all. No worries, please. Have a seat. Thank you so much, Dr. Akhtar, for those remarks. I think as on it, huh? Thank you for that, Dr. Saib. Again, like the chair said, you kind of covered it all for all of us. And that's exactly the conversation that we'll be having today. I think there are lots of strands in there that I'll probably pick and hand over to some of my speakers now. One of them being that we need solutions tailored to national and sub-national priorities. And that's exactly something I think, Hamza, that you're pioneering with the climate prosperity plans, where you think that the right unit of ambition now is the national unit. The right unit of ambition should come from countries rather than regions, rather than the broader framework of Paris Agreement. It's the countries that have to decide their pathways, and then those pathways should lead to implementability because the ambition is coming from the right level. But yet again, within this ambition and the prosperity plan, there's a lot of codependency on an international structure and architecture that has to deliver in ensuring said implementability. So I would love to hear your thoughts on how is it looking for the Climate Vulnerable Forum and the V20. What are your thoughts on making sure that these prosperity plans do not become a part of the ambition, but rather part of the solution?
Thank you so much, Mustafa, and thank you so much to the organizers for having me here. It is indeed a very esteemed panel. I would say I'm very honored to be in a panel with my heroes as well, Justice Saab and Dr. Akhtar. I also want to mention at the start that it was the efforts of Dr. Akhtar. V20 is very active in Pakistan, and I think that needs to be acknowledged. So thank you so much. You'll be happy to know, Madam, that the South Asia office is now in Pakistan. So from Pakistan, we're dealing with the entire region. So I think Dr. Akhtar has covered a lot of the things that I was actually managing my presentation as we were going, because I wanted to make sure that I add value to the conversation. So I'll just quickly overview some of the things that we're doing, and I'll start off with the V20 and who we are. So we're a group of intergovernmental agency of 74 countries now. So not 68, Mustafa, we're 74 countries now. And it's being headed, the presidency is with the Prime Minister of Barbados. So our chair changes every 2 years, and currently it's being led by the Prime Minister Mia Mottley. Our Secretary General is the former President of Maldives, President Mohammed Nasheed. And every 2 years, this presidency changes, and it's going to change again in 2026. So what you see on the screen is essentially the Global South. It's essentially the vulnerable countries of the world that continue to face climate disasters, that continue to talk in the lingos that we talk about fiscal shrinkage, not much capital, and all those things that are hindering development and hindering climate development in these countries. The work that V20 does is not just focused on with the governments of our members, but it is also working a lot on what Dr. Akhtar was mentioning in trying to influence and fix the international financial architecture, which seems to be the starting point where the problem starts, and I'm going to speak about that. So every year we have 2 meetings at the World Bank forums, the spring and annuals, where we bring the finance ministers together because we think that they hold the keys to actually influencing the movement of flows towards the right areas in development and for climate. And then we also meet with the leaders at the UNGA, where we talk about what is important for us to have prepared in the negotiations that we're going to have with other countries, especially developed countries. And then we also meet with key individuals who hold the keys to having those conversations, such as we did at COP30. Now, COP30 has had mixed reviews, so I'm not going to get into there because that's going to be a separate discussion. But that's the kind of work that we're doing on the international front. But let's take a step back and try to understand what are the challenges that the V20 countries are facing. And when I talk about, challenges we face, we often hear, we're facing climate debt traps. We're facing fiscal space, loss of fiscal space. We're facing, all these issues because of climate vulnerability. But the question I always ask is, what is climate vulnerability? How can we say that we are climate vulnerable? And then I think of my conversations with my father on dinner tables or lunches, because he was in the Navy, and he would tell me that, as he progressed in Navy, he went from a smaller boat to a medium-sized boat to a ship. And what he tells me is that when he moved from a smaller to a medium-sized boat and the storm used to come, he would still feel the boat is moving and the course correction is needed and he's withering in a different direction. But when he went to a bigger boat, the storm didn't impact him that much. And I think of this very similar to how climate vulnerability is an issue of capacity. As you move on to a bigger boat, as you build capacity, you start to feel the storm less because you're adapting, you're becoming resilient. And it goes back to those stories that my father used to tell me. So climate vulnerability in our, conversations with government is not much about geography, but more about building that capacity. And the reason why our boats wither away and need course correction is because we continue to face disproportionate impacts. We continue to face economic strains. We continue to have lack of technology. And when the floods hit us, we take 36 to 48 months to recover. And as Dr. Akhtar mentioned, many of those pledges never turn into delivery. And in the case of Pakistan, I think that has happened multiple times where there have been many pledges made, but the delivery hasn't happened. And then we also lack scientific capacity to understand the challenges that we are continuously facing. So that's something we talk about in terms of climate vulnerability. But what's actually happening in terms of flows? And this is very important to understand. This is a report done in 2023, so it's slightly old. But what it tells us is that the money moving away for principal payments and interest payments from developing countries to developed countries increased by $68 billion to $200 billion. And when we deep dive, we find out that the non-concessional loans were 40 billion, almost 40 billion, and the concessional loans were only 2 billion. So if you look at this ratio, it's 1 to 100. So money is actually leaving developing countries to developed countries. So that's the first important thing to understand of what's happening in this multilateral space. The second piece to really hone into is that the cost of capital in our countries remains very high. If you look at the country list that I have over here and you look at the average interest rate, it's extremely high. And I'll give you two very concrete examples here. If you have to build a solar power plant in Maldives, it's going to cost you more than it's going to cost in Spain. We're having some discussions in Bangladesh, and there was an energy project, very important to Bangladesh. And we went to a bank, and the bank said, we're going to charge you 17 to 18% interest on this. That's the conversation we're having. Then we went to the private sector, and the private sector said, the hurdle rates that we have are 23% plus alpha. So when you start on these kind of interest rates, on this kind of high cost of capital, automatically, you have a very hard time in building that adaptation resilience in your countries. So that's the second point I want you guys to focus in on. So the money's flowing in the wrong direction, the first point, and there's high cost of capital. The third is, in many of our countries, we find this dependency on aid, which is no longer going to be the case. And here's why. ODA is shrinking. France, Germany, UK, Netherlands, and US is a separate story, has already announced cuts in ODA. Altogether, these cuts are going to amount to almost $32 to $48 billion. That's a massive cut. So you have money flowing in the wrong direction. You have high cost of capital. And oh, by the way, the aid is also going to get, it's going to shrink. And the last thing is, in the multilateral world, we did some analysis, and this is slightly old because we had 70 countries at that point, but I've checked it, even with 74 countries, it hasn't changed much. If you look at the voice that we have, representation that we have in IMF and the MDB system, it's very low. You have the vulnerable countries. In IMF, our quotas are 5% and our voting power is 6.8%. In MDB system, our capital is 7.6 and voting power is 8.6%. The population is 22.4. And compare that with the other, organizations that you see. So clearly, you have a disconnect in how the world and the multilaterals are working when it comes to climate vulnerable countries. So, and then the last thing I want to say before I get into the solutions is that we analyzed what is required for the vulnerable countries to move towards prosperity. And we figured out that the current investments coming in are only at 90, and we need 490 billion every year coming in. That's 5 times more capital required. So you have this massive gap where you have money flowing in the wrong direction, high interest rates, burgeoning debt, low representation, and the requirement is so high. So now I want to go back to what Dr. Akhtar was mentioning, that yes, multilateral system is moving at a snail's speed. It's almost at the brink, but we need to pull something out of this rubble, and we need to go beyond this dependency mode. And one of the things that we're working on with our countries, not just in Pakistan, we've made really good progress, and hopefully, inshallah, you'll be hearing very good news very soon. But in all our countries, we're doing something what we call the climate prosperity plans. These are national investment strategies. Now we need to showcase to the world that we have projects, we have ambition that requires investments. And oh, by the way, they're bankable. So if you invest in us, you will actually get the money that you're looking for. So you don't need to go and invest in your own countries. You can find more returns here. And that is what we're doing with the climate prosperity plans. We've already done 4 or 5 climate prosperity plans. On the right, you'll see some of the plans that we worked on this year. We've already showcased many of them. We have pitched projects from these investment plans to investors, including some of the vertical funds, the CIF, the GEF, the GCF. And next year, we have a dozen more that we're going to work on. We couldn't work on this year because we didn't have the capacity, but next year we'll be definitely working on them. So that's the solution that we're trying to work with the governments right now. And what the climate prosperity plan is doing is it's giving you a very comprehensive macroeconomic model, which tells you where you're going to go from 2025 to all the way to 2050 in terms of your socioeconomic indicators. It gives you the clarity on green industrial policy, what kind of reforms are needed within the legislature. And then it gives you a list of those bankable projects that I'm talking about. That complements the other two. So you go from theory to action so that the investments can start flowing in these countries. Interesting part that you need to understand is we are very good in creating reports. In Pakistan, if you go to any office, you will find 1 million reports that are sitting on the cabinets. What we want to do is something different. We want to have a live report that we, come up to, revisit in every 3 months, 4 months. But we also are pitching to our countries what we call the country platform, which is the delivery unit of the report that we are creating, of the national investment strategy that we're creating. And I'll just give you a quick glance of what kind of work it's doing. Many of these things Dr. Akhtar has already mentioned. What we're doing with these countries is we're saying, look, you need to have a national, whole of government, whole of society approach towards implementation. You need to have direct links to investors, to vertical funds, and we'll help you sort that out. You need to have the project preparation facilities. You need to have the right bankable list of bankable projects so that you can pitch it to the investors, not in the roadshows that the V20 is providing you, but also in other roadshows. You can have pacts with other countries and you can pitch those projects to other countries as well. So on the right-hand side, you see some of the areas that we're going to mold this country platform towards. So you'll have subnational support. So your provinces, your subnationals can also have those access to those information and project preparation facilities and FDIs and technology access and transfer. And then at the bottom, you see all the areas of support that will be provided to these country platforms, which become the singular delivery unit of those prosperity plans, which includes project pipeline development, which includes mobilizing climate finance, which includes CDRFI, climate disaster risk financing and insurance. So what we're pitching in closing, Mustafa, is we're saying, look, multilateralism may be at the brink, but we can do a lot. We can do a lot together. We have the resources. What we need to do is have a plan. We need to have a strategy towards implementation. And we need to go out and make sure that these investors, these vertical funds are investing in our projects that move us from vulnerability to prosperity. So I'll stop there and I'll be happy to stay on if you have any questions. Thank you so much once again to the organizers, and over to you, Mustafa.
Thank you so much, Hamza. Thank you so much, Hamza. Thank you for bringing the point forth of the vulnerability, essentially, that a lot of our region, a lot of our countries are facing. And yet, again, like you said, what we can do is show our ambition. What we can do is capitalize on the investability of clean solutions, essentially, and make sure that we're able to do this transition on our own without the dependency on the structures that have been created. So it's essentially a reformed mechanism for multilateralism, where the countries say, okay, we've had enough of the system as is, so let's create something that would allow us to transcend the system, essentially. And on that note, I would like to bring in Liddy, because this is the perfect spot for you, Liddy, where I would like to discuss essentially something that Hamza very rightly pointed out, and that's the question of MDB reform. The fact that, we talk a lot about it. The system wasn't designed for climate vulnerability. It was designed on other methods for war, for peace, essentially supporting certain countries to make sure that they have control over the security of the globe, right? Yet the vulnerable nations is another unit that has come up. Climate change is the paramount challenge facing the globe. And with that challenge, we require certain reforms that haven't been that forthcoming, to be fair. They have been slow, they have been not plenty. There is a lot of resistance to that change. Yet energy transition has to happen, yet climate change is manifesting day in, day out. So how do we actually go about those reforms? And then more essentially, equally important is all of that implementation of the said ambition, which again, we've been at the COP, you were there while a lot of these decisions were being made. So how do you think this is going to change probably in the coming years? And how do we campaign to change as campaigners and activists?
Well, first of all, I'd like to just give a very short comment to the opening you gave earlier, just to maybe put things in a shift in a little bit perspective. You mentioned, and very correctly so, the significance of our region of Asia, but you also did mention that we also host the biggest emitters in Asia. But I'd just like to put that in a little bit of perspective, because for climate change, the metrics of responsibility for climate change has to be seen in historical accumulated emissions. Because what we have in the atmosphere today is not just the product of the last few years, it's the product of more than 100 years since the beginning of industrialization. And the study of many think tanks show that the biggest contributor to global historical emissions is the United States. And the combined historical emissions of China and India combined is smaller than that of the United States. So just to put those things in the perspective and to begin also as one of the very, very important assumptions that we should make in terms of reform and what to do with the problem of finance, I would like to reiterate the first principle that you mentioned earlier, which is equity. And that equity has to be based on these differentiated responsibilities. And on that note, I'd just like to broaden a little bit the framing of what do we do about the problem of finance, which is cutting across all the negotiations. This is the most sticky point in the negotiations. You mentioned the roadmap for the transitioning away from fossil fuels. And for this, it's not a simple story of countries who are for a roadmap and countries who are against a roadmap, because many of the countries who did not vote for the roadmap to be included in the language were not against a roadmap. It was basically refusal to be discussing a roadmap without clear finance commitments on the table, because it's useless to commit to a roadmap without the means of implementation. So it's, we have to go beyond the surface, and we know that the intramurals and negotiations is about leveraging. Who leverages what for what? And in this Belém COP, it was actually a leveraging of the roadmap vis-a-vis the financing for the adaptation. And I think the COP presidency was very good in discerning that towards the end of the negotiation, so that even if Brazil was the proponent of the roadmap to be included in the agenda, it eventually withdrew that from the text because it understood that the dynamics were going on was not simply about whether it's for a roadmap or against a roadmap. But I'm digressing, just on the finance question. I think it's very important to acknowledge that, of course, we need all types of finance in order to make the transition successful, and not just the energy transition, the entire whole of society transition. But we still assert that public finance must lead. Private finance, of course, there has to be private finance. For instance, the greening of private industry and commerce, that should not be the burden of governments. The private sector should take on the responsibility for financing the greening of their own sector, of the private commercial and industrial sector. But for us to achieve the vision of an energy transition that we want, which is, at the end of the day, is not just about transitioning from fossils to renewables, it's about providing universal access to clean and renewable energy to our people. There's no way that's going to happen if we just purely depend on markets and the private sector. The governments must lead, and they need the means to lead, which is public finance. And for that, we still insist that, yes, we need to transform the international financial architecture, but in the immediate, trillions can be mobilized. Trillions in public finance can be mobilized by the rich countries, the developed countries, as they are called in the UN negotiations, or the global north, as we call them in civil society. And there are many ways that this can be made possible. And there are various studies that I'm not going to go into detail right now, but to mention just a few: the shifting of finance away from fossil fuel subsidies towards clean energy and renewable energy, the imposition of wealth taxes. Even 0.01% of wealth tax can actually mobilize hundreds of billions of dollars across the world. And even shifting, prioritizing budgeting for military operations, for instance, towards more peace and development-based and climate action-based spending are very important sources for those trillions. So there are many studies for that. Now, in terms of the multilateral development banks, which is, again, one of the major subjects in the discussions on climate finance when it comes to mobilizing climate finance. And by the way, a very key fight in the negotiations is between the words deliver and mobilize. Yeah. Because, as you rightly mentioned, climate finance is an obligation that the global north, in terms of the convention, a legal obligation in the convention, they are supposed to deliver. But they want the word mobilize because that means it will not necessarily come from them. They can mobilize it from other sources, i.e. the private sector to the developing countries. But in terms of MDB reform, we also need to caution that because they are banks and the main instruments for financing are loans, we have to caution about where loans are appropriate for what kind of spending. So for instance, in the energy transition, we're a little bit more flexible about the idea of loans because the energy sector doesn't give away energy for free. So there is some form of cost recovery by which you can pay back the loans and the interest. But for the energy transition, building community-based, decentralized, distributed energy systems, which is what we need mostly in Asia, because you also mentioned that we do have the biggest percentage of the world's poor in our region. What we need, at the very least, if not grants, is highly concessional loans. Because there is no way that community distributed energy is going to earn the kind of revenues that we will be needing in order for us to pay back loans with market-based interest rates. So so in the whole call for MDB finance to be scaled up, we need to look at for what, and we need to look at in terms of what kind of MDB finance. Because as one of our longest running campaigns in Asia, which is about freedom from debt, we don't want climate solutions to exacerbate the debt problem in our countries. So we do want to mobilize public finance primarily in grant-based form, and then look at what kind of projects and initiatives that loans can be appropriate, especially highly concessional loans. So there has to be some very granular conversations around this because there's just all this rah-rah-rah about scaling up MDB finance, but there's no very sober and detailed discussion about where is this appropriate. So in terms of our investments, in terms of time and campaigning, we're really looking at making sure that climate finance is delivered as an obligation under the convention. And for this, and we believe, of course, that the whole international financial system has to be overhauled. But for this, delivery of climate finance is in their hands right now. There is no reason why those trillions cannot be delivered, not just mobilized. So I just stress my case.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Liddy. Thank you for bringing that nuance. And exactly, I think that's very well summed up. The challenge isn't what kind of finance, it's about making sure that the right kind of finance is mobilized through the right channels. And at the end of the day, the unit that matters most is the unit of people, right? One person, one community, one subnational region, two national, two regional, two global. So again, we often, when we look at the big picture at the global level, we undermine the importance of the basic unit and the goal at hand, which is universal access to clean energy, to affordable energy for everyone. And that's, I think, the route that we need to often, bring back to conversations that we have when we talk about climate finance. So thank you for bringing that nuance on the table. I'd like to now move on to Dr. Pichamon, who's been listening patiently to the conversation. And I'd like to refer to something that Dr. Akhtar pointed out, that we need a just transition mechanism with team. And as the working group chair for business and human rights of the UN, I would love to know more about your thoughts on how the recently approved JTM at COP30 can be operationalized to protect workers and communities across Asia's rapidly expanding RE supply chains from mineral extraction to manufacturing. How do you think this JTM can be made one with teeth? And then essentially, does the current system have the ability to make sure that we can develop these mechanisms, that we can implement these mechanisms, we can enforce these mechanisms, or do we need a separate layer of ambition to come from somewhere else to make sure that this transition doesn't repeat what we did with previous transitions And this is fundamentally a more human-centric energy transition.
Thank you for that question. And let me just say right now that I don't think I'll be able to go into all of the details of what you had just asked me, including in relation to whether grants are better or not. And certainly, I don't think I can comment too much right now in relation to the just transition mechanism, as we still have to wait and see what will happen next year, noting that this is still very much, from the sounds of it, in the development stage, and we'll have to always take things with a grain of salt, as we saw at COP30. But let me see if I can add or inject a bit of the human rights thinking that the working group has been working on in relation to bigger questions around the energy transition, especially for the Asia Pacific region, and to see whether we can actually break down some of those silos that we still see in place in relation to the conversations that happen in the climate, environmental spaces, and in the human rights and business and human rights spaces. So as I'm joining you from virtually from Canberra, Australia, I would like to acknowledge the Ngunnawal people as the traditional custodians of the lands on which I speak, and pay my respects to Ngunnawal elders past, present, and emerging, and thank them for their continuing care of country and community. And I also would like to very much thank the organizers, in particular, Mr. Ubaid Urremansia, for inviting the UN Working Group on Business and Human Rights to join this important and stimulating discussion today. I very much regret not having been able to join you in person, but I am pleased that online participation has been made possible. Now, returning to something that was said earlier in relation to our session's title, Multilateralism at the Brink, I do think that as dramatic as it may well be, it does capture very well the urgency and the profound uncertainty of the present moment. In fact, it speaks to one of the key messages that came out of the Working Group's UN Forum on Business and Human Rights that I chaired last week, and which saw around 7,000 participants come together in Geneva and online to discuss how to tackle the business-related human rights challenges of our time, including the climate crisis and environmental degradation. As we've already heard from other speakers, it goes without saying that Asia's energy transformation is not a distant aspiration, but is very much happening now across mineral-rich regions, manufacturing hubs, and frontline communities. So the question before us from a business and human rights perspective is whether this transformation will end up, as you were saying, moderator, replicating the exploitation patterns of the fossil fuel industries, or whether we will be able to seize this opportunity to embed justice, human rights, and sustainability at the very heart of the renewable energy industry and critical mineral supply chains. Now, going back to your question about the just transition mechanism from COP30, the approval of the development of this mechanism is a milestone, as others are also noting now. The Bellum decision contains some of the most strongest human rights-based framing that we've ever seen adopted in a COP decision on just transition, which really goes to emphasizing the importance of respecting, promoting, and fulfilling human rights, including labor rights, in the context of the energy transition. I think it also marks a broader shift in the narrative of the just transition, which is deemed now to be absolutely necessary, right, to accelerating climate action as well as strengthening mitigation and adaptation outcomes. This framing is critical for Asia in particular, where communities that are disproportionately experiencing climate-related impacts alongside the adverse impacts from resource extraction have been calling for the energy transition to not only be fast, but also just and fair. So here, what I really want to underscore is that in addition to states, businesses must also shoulder the responsibility to ensure that that the transition is a just one, and that this is seen as part of their broader responsibilities to respecting human rights. In fact, the Working Group's 2023 thematic report that we had presented to the UN General Assembly on the extractive sector and just transition offers some additional insights in this regard. It reminds us that extractive industries, whether coal, oil, or minerals, essential for renewable technologies, have historically been associated with serious human rights abuses, whether these be forced displacement, environmental destruction, child labor, or attacks on environmental human rights defenders. The report warns that without deliberate safeguards, the rush for transition minerals such as lithium, cobalt, and nickel could reproduce these harms. And so it calls on and calls for businesses to embed what we call human rights due diligence across the entire life cycle of extractive projects, from exploration through to closure, and stresses the importance of responsible exit strategies. So here, what I mean by that is that the closure of, let's say, mines must not leave communities abandoned with polluted lands and no livelihoods, but rather remediation, compensation, and alternative development pathways are essential. So our report, I would also add, highlights to the need to integrate just transition principles into investment decisions. Investors, including financial institutions, must assess not only climate risks, but equally human rights risks. This means requiring the businesses they invest in to demonstrate how they will protect workers, respect human rights more generally, including the rights of indigenous peoples, and provide effective remedies for harms when they occur. And I should emphasize here that a growing number of investors are incorporating these considerations into their decision-making, often under the kind of the umbrella concept of ESG. But what this also then means is that states must align their industrial policies with human rights standards to ensure that subsidies and incentives for renewable energy are conditional on business respect for human rights. All of this is really, it comes from the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, or the UNGPs, which were endorsed back in 2011 by the UN Human Rights Council as the global authoritative standard, clarifying the state duty to protect human rights, the corporate responsibility to respect them, and the need to ensure access to remedy. And central to the UNGPs is this notion of human rights due diligence, which is a process that businesses should conduct in order to identify, address, and prevent both the actual and potential adverse impacts that their operations, products, or services may have on human rights. So in this way, the guiding principles, or the UNGPs, are very much relevant to ensuring a just energy transition. The working group has emphasized in this regard the importance of ensuring a smart mix of both mandatory and voluntary measures at the international and national levels to ensure that the principles are actually being implemented by states and by businesses alike. And so what this means in practice is that we need to see strong national legislation sit alongside effective regulatory oversight, as well as voluntary initiatives raising the ambition and multilateral frameworks that can help set common expectations across borders when it comes to the energy transition and the potential and actual impacts on human rights. And here I wanted to quickly note that Pakistan has a national action plan on business and human rights. And these national action plans, or NAPs, are really important in this regard. Pakistan's SNAP itself, which runs until next year, does not directly address energy transition issues, but it does, however, acknowledge the need for the government to create a conducive environment for businesses to be rights respecting and to conduct human rights due diligence. And here it's important, especially now, given that Pakistan's major trading partners, such as the European Union and others, are already putting in place mandatory human rights due diligence measures for their supply chains. And so aligning with these international developments will be essential for Pakistan, as it would also be for other Asian countries, to remain not only competitive in global markets, but to also ensure, most importantly, that human rights are being protected and respected across supply chains, especially critical mineral supply chains. I should offer a word of caution here, however. Implementing mandatory and voluntary measures alone will not be enough if they are treated as mere box-ticking compliance exercises, which is something that we still see from a number of businesses operating in these sectors. And so for these measures to work, they really do need to be embedded in governance, supported by transparency in procurement and contracting, and also reinforced by actual accessible grievance mechanisms. And so achieving the smart mix of measures, so to speak, is really about maintaining balance by ensuring that states fulfill their duty to protect human rights and that businesses respect them as well. One very final note before I conclude here is to also say that multilateral accountability mechanisms, if I can put them that way, are important for Asia, given that supply chains relevant to the just transition frequently cross borders and investments flow through complex networks of, state-owned enterprises, private companies, and financial institutions. And so altogether, this is why we need to take a transboundary perspective on the human rights implications that the energy transition can have as well. But in order to protect the frontline communities that we see at risk in this transition, it is also to ensure that multilateral action exists alongside national and local action too. And so there are many aspects, I would say, of accountability that would be better achieved locally through, for example, community-led initiatives or indigenous governance, but also others that will require national will as expressed through national legislation and enforcement. And so really the challenge here, in addition to all of the climate financing challenges that we've heard from other speakers, is to design a layered system where multilateral frameworks can help set the standards to ensure cross-border accountability, but where we see this complementing national laws and local governance efforts to really enforce the business responsibility to respect human rights as part of the just energy transition. So altogether, I know that's a lot to perhaps take in, but it is extremely important that, a just transition is ensured, because otherwise we are at risk of replicating the problems that we've seen in previous energy transitions, if I can put it that way. And really, at the end of the day, we're all here talking about these issues because we want to protect the planet, but equally the people that live on this earth. And that means actually ensuring that we safeguard people and their rights from harm, and we ensure that climate finance flows to those who need it most. With that, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Pichaman, for those remarks. Again, I think you very rightly highlighted the balance that is needed between national legislation and obviously the importance of having these multilateral frameworks acting as safeguards and ensuring the accountability mechanisms that have to be developed. And gives me the perfect segue for Chujin, because SFOC has been working on these very lines where you've been able to get some landmark constitutional victories on climate rights, especially the climate redressal mechanisms across country boundaries. I think this is a precedence that sets countries and citizens well to make sure that their businesses and governments are held better accountable for some of the climate damages that they're causing in times for the region where we need to scale up such measures. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on how do you think those measures perhaps could be replicated across Asia, and where do you think is the biggest opportunity of replicability within these successes and frameworks?
Thank you. Thank you very much. First of all, it's great to see you on screen, and apologies for not being able to be in Lahore. I did receive this request quite recently, and I think actually in Belém, and it's very interesting. I mean, Lydia, I'm amazed by your stamina. I mean, you were in Belém with me 2 weeks ago. Now you're in Lahore. Thank you very much for the invitation as well. It would have been great to meet and talk with the energy transition stakeholders in Pakistan, because it is I mean, what I hear from is happening in Pakistan is very dramatic and inspiring. Yes, as Mustafa has mentioned, we have pursued and succeeded in a couple of climate right related not sure whether they have victories, but progress. I mean, one of the most let's say well-known examples is the Constitutional Court lawsuit that basically ruled unconstitutional our previous NDC, 23 NDC, based on what the state has to do when it comes to the climate crisis. Legally, something was deemed wrong, but I kind of consider this and also many other litigative efforts that we've been pursuing, not something that is isolated to the courtroom. It was basically a process of building a community of thinkers working on climate, which eventually spilled over to the courtrooms. Because when we first started to work on the climate case, I was also very hesitant of working on the case. But there were people who believed that it should go without a lot of legal thinking. The case was filed in 2020, early 2020, and the ruling came out in 2024, August. We kind of sensed that this ruling might be in the favor of the climate movement because it was rendered during the height of the summer. But the most important part of that is that when the case began, it was a case among a couple of stakeholders, 19 students, a couple of lawyers supporting that, a couple of organizations like us, supporting that. When it came out, the crowd around the court was massive. Other court cases were combined. Other similar cases were combined, and I think that is what that is the outside the court process that takes place. I think in other cases where we try to seek accountability from emitters, similar things happen. We have launched several cases on greenwashing against fossil fuel producers, steel makers. It is a very, let's say, a very collective process of learning what climate science is. First, when companies are confronted by the idea that what they're doing, the way they are framing their products as carbon neutral or green is wrong, they don't agree. But eventually, because we triggered something, the emitters or the government side look into the basis of the claims and kind of realize, okay, this chemical reaction happening here does emit a lot, and it's not as small as we thought. And therefore, it is a bit embarrassing to say something is green, it's carbon neutral. And I think that is what happens. So the essence of the redressal mechanisms that I think that Mustafa mentioned is actually not that much about who pays for what. It's eventually a process of making the society understand where emissions come from and who is responsible. And usually, although nothing really happens inside the court mechanism because the court has limited power, the society does eventually align with what science and economics tells us. With Mustafa also asked me about how this litigation and advocacy approach can be scaled across Asia to ensure countries honor their NDC commitments. I think every society is different. Some would be closed, more, let's say, when it comes to legal measures, maybe a bit more conservative, some may be open. But I think in every society, there is a way where people can discuss about right science and wrong science. I mentioned about greenwashing and greenwashing advertisements. In most societies, advertising something on a false basis is not right, and therefore I think this can be replicated. I think another thing that we can consider is that just like most of the commodities we use, money and commodities are very international. So even if something that Korea, where I am, does cannot be challenged in Korea, it can be, as much as the commodities produced here flow to Europe or the USA, there will be a room to challenge that the activities that we do here in a different jurisdiction. So I think there, of course, and the same lies with Pakistan. I do. I mean, if there's another chance to discuss or another round of questions, I would like to add my remarks on the solar uptake happening in Pakistan. But may I understand that Mustafa, that there will be another round of questions, or should I cover that now?
You can go ahead really quickly because we are a bit short on time, Eugene. So please go ahead.
I mean, I think what has happened in Pakistan recently and really motivates you a lot. I mean, we're talking about multilateralism. What Pakistan showed is, apart from all that, the citizens just took care of the problem. I also saw in the news that that renewable uptake, I'm not sure, there may be different discussions there, has started to cancel LNG imports coming into Pakistan, for example, from Qatar. That is great. And I think that connects with what Hamza has mentioned. Probably in that potential LNG import from Qatar to Pakistan would have been supported by an export credit agency in Europe. There will have been public financing from Korea or Japan on part of the gas facilities, either the midstream or the downstream or the upstream facilities. Which would have been better used if they were to support utility scale solar power plants in Pakistan. I think that is a very good lesson learned, and there has to be more challenges on these fossil fuel infrastructure developments, commodity movements as well. Once again, thank you very much for the invitation.
Of course, thank you so much. Thank you, Eugene, for those remarks. I think in the interest of time, from one courtroom to the other. It's an honor for us to have the former judge of the Supreme Court of Pakistan, Justice Syed Mansoor Ali Shah, with us, gracing his presence as the chair of the session. So I would like to request him for his concluding remarks on the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Lums, for inviting me. Thank you to all the other co-organizers for inviting me. I stand dwarfed actually in front of such wonderful experts, such knowledgeable experts who said wonderful things, and I've learned a lot today. My perspective, of course, is slightly different, and it's justice-based. So I'll be looking at things with that kind of lens. And I think at the core of my talk, briefly, is about, I think the core issue here is of justice, and that has to be understood, whether it be climate justice, or whether it be energy justice, or whether it be planetary justice. To my mind, no nation can survive without justice, and neither can the planet, you see. So it's so important that the rights-based concept needs to be understood. As a judge or a former judge, I can look at the whole debate in the context of rights and in the context of justice. And when we talk about justice, it's very important to understand that justice is largely embedded in people-centric approach, you see. It is for people and it is for nature. That's what justice is all about. So the entire framework of justice revolves or gravitates around people, and now increasingly so in a biocentric manner around nature. And that's the protection that we need to seek. Because if we fail that, if we fail people, or if we fail nature, the entire debate comes to an end. Actually, there is nothing much that you can do. So let me just quickly get to that point. Much has been said. I might be skipping through some of the things that I've written earlier and get to the part where I think the courts, whatever is left of them, can play a bit of a role in Pakistan, but also globally, and mostly Asian courts. It's important for that. So Asia is not one country, it is half of humanity. That perspective we need to understand. So there are islands, deserts, deltas, forests, megacities, different histories, different incomes, different systems. Yet one truth binds us all, and that is the fate of the planet will be decided in Asia. And that's very clear. If Asia locks itself into fossil fuels, the Paris Agreement collapses, to my mind. If Asia builds a new order of clean energy and climate resilience, climate justice still has a chance. So, to me, energy is at the heart of climate change, and I think there is there's no debate about this question. But moving on, we understand how the global north has caused the crisis. I don't want to go into that, but it is again a question of justice, whether the global north is being just about the whole debate. So, as I said, at every layer, to my mind, justice keeps coming up. So it's a story of energy, and it's a story of justice, to my mind, when we talk about just transition or moving on to clean energy. So just quickly coming on to multilateralism and why it has failed, my understanding would be that the UN or the IMF or the World Bank or the WTO, and we've got experts here, were made for war prevention and trade and not global energy transition as such, foundationally. Some argue that multilateralism did prepare for climate change. After all, we have the UNFCCC and the 30 COPs with us, but UNFCCC is a negotiating forum, not an implementing system. It cannot reform finance, technology, or trade, and these foundations of multilateralism built in 1944 for post-war reconstruction were never designed for decarbonization. So COP can agree on goals, but institutions that control capital, patents, and supply chains still live in another century. That's why multilateralism struggles. The climate regime is modern, but the machinery that must deliver the transition is outdated, to my mind. So national economic interests override global commitments. Climate promises are easy to make, hard to deliver. That's why you have 30 COPs, and we're kind of all there. Climate finance never matched the scale. The US $100 billion arrived late, partially, mostly as loans, you see. And talking about finance, if you look at your floods, last floods, a bill of $20 billion or so, the recent floods, and my understanding while I was sitting in the court when we looked at the floods, nothing has come to us internationally. So the entire global finance or the climate finance issue, the Supreme Court went ahead and said climate finance is a fundamental right. To my mind, no adaptation is possible unless there's climate finance. And unless climate finance is seriously structured, there is no way you can go ahead either for transitioning to clean energy or adaptations. It'll all be words. And if we keep our reliance on the North, I think nothing much is going to happen. And I just want to quickly take you to one of the recent cases at the Supreme Court we heard was where Wasa wanted a contamination plant set up in Lahore to ensure that the contaminated water does not enter River Ravi. The case ends up in the Supreme Court after 40 years. So you can imagine for 40 years the contamination kept going, and the case comes to us, and it's by the landowners whose land was acquired to set up the treatment plant. And they said, nothing has happened, please return our land to us. Where is the treatment plant? And the government's response to that was, we're waiting for that $1 billion promised by the World Bank. It's been 40 years, nothing has come. Later on, I had a word with some other people and they said, nothing is coming our way. So we said in that judgment that please go for homegrown solutions. We need to think of a more innovative homegrown science, homegrown solutions to these problems. Stop waiting for things to come from the north. They'll never come your way. There is a lot more happening there, and they जिसे कहते हैं ट्रक की बत्ती के पीछे लगाया हुआ है आपको नॉर्थ ने और आप चलते जा रहे हैं उसको छोड़ दें. We need to start get our act together and do something ourselves. And that's exactly what the Supreme Court said, that the climate finance is a fundamental right. Go for homegrown solutions. So quickly on that finance part, which is critical for this entire debate, please think of homegrown solutions. And you have experts sitting here who will know better how to restructure and how to look at finance in that kind of a homely, more homegrown fashion. So consensus politics, you see, which is COP, versus climate physics. One moves slowly, the other does not negotiate. So it doesn't work that way. Climate is moving at a very fast pace. COP is just negotiations moving elsewhere. normally judges are never told how long time it takes, but I mean, I'll try to finish as soon as possible. I was just brought in the end. I didn't realize that. So I just want to quickly identify, once again on a judicial lens, that Asia has twin crises to our mind, and that is on the basis of the jurisprudence we've produced over the years. One is that Asia did not cause the crisis, yet carries the burden. Asia's per capita emissions remain low, but Asia now produces half of global annual CO2 simply because it is big and rising. So Asia faces monsoon disruptions, glacial melt, coastal flooding, and all that. But Asia also depends heavily on imported fossil fuels, exposed to price shocks and geopolitical leverage. Asia's paradox then is that Asia did not create the crisis, but Asia will determine the solution, you see. If Asia repeats the fossil path of the North, the planet overshoots 2.5 to 3 degrees centigrade. If Asia leapfrogs to clean energy, we keep climate goals within reach and build healthier, more secure societies. So the new Asian pathway to clean energy and adaptation, we'll have to think of how to go forward. The old framing that mitigation is a North problem, adaptation is a South problem, we have to forget that. We in the court thought that. We thought the problem was the North and we have to do adaptation. I think that no longer works. We need to redefine. Mitigation is essential. Asia's future emissions will decide the global outcome, so that's also important for us. Adaptation is existential. Asia is already in a climate emergency, so clean energy is the hinge that will connect the two, to my mind. So clean energy reduces emissions, cleans urban air, strengthens energy security, power adaptation systems, hospitals, cooling centers, flood resilience, irrigation, data systems. You need clean energy even to adapt, you see. So that's how the two get connected between each other. Clean energy is not only mitigation, it is survival, sovereignty, and justice. If you put together the concept of clean energy, that's how important it is. So skipping, I mean, we've all talked about how, what are the obstacles Asia faces, mainly being finance and technology. But I want to come to something interesting, and that's what relates to me. What's the role of Asian judiciaries is important. I think that dimension needs to be brought in. Asia carries a double burden, that's climate impacts and energy poverty. In this context, a timid judiciary, or if I may say compromised judiciary, is a luxury we cannot afford, or any country can afford in Asia. They need to be robust judiciaries who make sure that they get implementation done on these agendas. If you remember, one of the leading cases from Pakistan, which is Asghar Laghari case, was implementation of the climate policy of the government, which the government could not do, but the courts did it. So the courts play a very active role in implementation, because all these other multilateral forums are negotiation. It's all talk. The real action could be in these Asian courts if we were to build a coalition of Asian courts. So the right to, they have been already deciding this matter, right to life and dignity includes the right to clean air, a safe climate, and a sustainable energy. It is about time that the Asian courts were to say that right to clean energy is a fundamental right. It's important to think that way. The courts will have to think that way, because you cannot go on to any energy unless it's clean and renewable. And the courts will have to ensure that every project that comes before them or before the EPAs, they make sure that it is a clean energy, otherwise those projects don't go through. So I think this judicial multilateralism is something that we can give flight to. If the executive has failed, maybe it comes together through the judicial functions. Where governmental multilateralism stalls, courts can learn from each other, cite each other, develop a shared jurisprudence of climate responsibility, enforce national commitment. These are all doable items, and protect the vulnerable in just transition. As I'm a rule of a law man, so I'm told it's just 1 minute, I'm just closing. So climate justice for Asia means those who did least must not suffer most. Those who gained most must help finance a different path. This is again justice. Leaders must think beyond election cycles and think about their people. And I'll just leave you with Pablo Neruda, a Chilean poet's wonderful quote, that you can cut all the flowers, but you cannot keep the spring from coming, and it will come one day. Thank you so much.
Hello. We have time for a few questions. If अच्छा अच्छा चलिए
Yeah, again, apologies. We don't have time for questions. I've been told through multiple chats that we are running a bit late. So we will try to conclude this panel. For conclusion, I would like to invite some of our hosts to please join us for group picture, and then we'll proceed with the agenda as is. Could I please request Dr. Fayaz Chaudhry, Dr. Tariq Jadoon to please join us on stage for group photo, please. Badr Alim Saab, please. Thank you so much. Thank you. We're just going to have group photo with this.
Thank you, Mustafa, for this wonderful session. I would also like to thank all the online participants. Ladies and gentlemen, now we are joined by Mr. Awais Ahmed Khan Laghari, who is current Federal Minister for Energy Power Division in Pakistan. During his tenure, he has worked on addressing Pakistan's energy challenges and advancing energy reforms. Mr. Laghari has also served multiple terms in both the national and provincial assemblies. Laghari Saab, over to you.
जी Assalamualaikum. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. First of all, I'd like to apologize for not being physically present at LUMS for this on this August forum. It was due to unavoidable circumstances that I could not make it to Lahore. I'd like to express my profound honor to join you at the Asia Energy Transition Summit convened by the Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition, LUMS, and the Alliance for Climate Justice and Clean Energy. I congratulate you all for establishing this summit as a flagship regional platform, one that brings together policymakers, civil society, financiers, industry leaders, and global thinkers to discuss the most defining challenge of our time, the transformation of our energy systems, and then propose solutions and way forward. This year's theme, Global Energy Governance and the Emerging Role of Clean Energy Transition, could not be more timely or more consequential. The world is undergoing a remarkable transformation in global energy diplomacy. According to recent analysis by the International Energy Agency, the global energy system is at a crossroads with profound implications for security, economic stability, and climate outcomes. Geopolitical tensions, shifting trade alignments, and recalibrations in multilateral diplomacy have reshaped how nations engage on energy and climate issues. The World Bank's global tracking framework shows that investments in low carbon finance, particularly in wind, solar, and green hydrogen, have continued to rise sharply. This trend is reshaping supply chains, national policy, and diplomatic engagement, giving rise to new alliances and partnerships around clean energy financing. These shifts are not just technical, they represent a realignment of global priorities and power dynamics. The impacts of climate change are no longer hypothetical, they are here and now. The UN Environment Programme's Emissions Gap Report underscores that extreme weather events are increasing in frequency and severity and disproportionately affect low-income and climate-vulnerable countries like ours. These impacts are not merely ecological, they are profoundly socio-economic. Climate change undermines health, livelihoods, and economic growth, particularly among societies least responsible for historical emissions. Even at the corporate level, sustainability has moved from an environmental concern to a business imperative. Cross-border mechanisms such as the EU's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism and reporting standards like IFRS, sustainability disclosure standards, are already reshaping global trade and finance. Companies that fail to adapt are at risk of exclusion from key markets and capital flows. The International Monetary Fund has also highlighted the growing importance of embedding climate resilience into fiscal planning and debt sustainability frameworks, especially through instruments such as the Resilience and Sustainability Facility. This evolving landscape demands new governance models. Traditional donor-recipient frameworks are being complemented and sometimes replaced by competitive diplomacy and more dynamic cooperation partnerships. Asia must navigate this complexity strategically, leveraging South-South cooperation and regional collaboration to influence emerging standards rather than passively adopting them. Leaders in this room have an opportunity to shape not just national pathways, but global governance itself. Asia currently accounts for nearly 48% of global energy demand and is home to approximately 60% of the world population. This means that Asia is not merely a participant in global transition, it is its center of gravity. In fact, Asia is already at the forefront of the global clean energy transition. In the last several years, the region has become the largest recipient of renewable energy investments worldwide. As documented by the ADB, clean energy investment in developing Asia grew by more than 900% since 2013, reaching $729 billion as of 2023, which represents nearly half of global clean energy financing flows. China alone in 2024 added 278 gigawatts of renewable energy capacity, while import numbers suggest that Pakistan had imported 17 gigawatts of solar panels during 2024. Despite this, Asia is among the most climate vulnerable regions in the world, facing a growing intensity and frequency of extreme weather events that threaten lives, livelihoods, and economic stability. According to the UN Environment Programme, Emissions Gap Report 2023, the region experiences recurrent heat waves, floods, cyclones, and droughts, with South and Southeast Asia disproportionately affected due to high population density and economic exposure. Countries like Bangladesh, India, the Philippines, and Pakistan regularly face devastating floods and tropical storms, while rising temperatures and changing precipitation patterns threaten agriculture. water security, and energy systems across the continent. The Asian Development Bank estimates that climate-related disasters in Asia cause annual economic losses exceeding $300 billion, affecting infrastructure, energy, and industrial productivity. These impacts underscore that Asia's energy transition is not just a climate imperative, but a strategic necessity. The transition is not just technological, it is financial. Instruments like the IMF Resilience Stability Fund provide critical support for resilience and sustainable investments, but they also raise important questions about debt sustainability and policy conditionalities. Complementary tools such as just energy transition partnerships and coal to clean credit initiatives are pioneering frameworks, but their success requires predictable financing, local ownership, and implementation strategies that reflect national realities. To truly unlock Asia's potential, financing must be equity-driven, locally informed, responsive to socio-economic diversity, aligned with long-term climate resilience goals. This is not just about climate targets. It is about modernization, jobs, innovation, and competitiveness. Now I'd like to focus towards Pakistan. Let me tell you that Pakistan contributes less than 1% of global greenhouse gas emissions. Yet, as UNEP's Climate Risk Index indicates, it is one of the top 10 climate vulnerable countries. The nation faces annual climate-induced losses exceeding 4 billion euros, impacting agriculture, infrastructure, water systems, and communities. For Pakistan, the energy transition is not merely an environmental responsibility, it is a matter of national security, economic survival, and human development. In response to these challenges, Pakistan is pursuing a comprehensive clean energy strategy anchored in the principles of decarbonization, digitization, and decentralization. In recent years, Pakistan has also undergone one of the world's most remarkable people-driven solar revolutions, a transformation now increasingly acknowledged by international research institutions and development partners. This revolution has allowed 50 gigawatts worth of solar panels being imported into Pakistan. Despite economic challenges, Pakistani households, farmers, small businesses, and industries have adopted rooftop and distributed solar at an unprecedented pace, making Pakistan one of the fastest growing residential solar markets in Asia, according to multiple independent assessments, including insights referenced by the World Bank and regional energy think tanks. This has demonstrated to the world that when people are empowered with the right policy environment, clean energy adoption can scale faster than anyone anticipates. Thus, today, Pakistan is proud to generate 52% of its electricity from clean and renewable resources, including hydro, solar, wind, and other technologies. This achievement reflects the concerted efforts of government, industry, and communities to embrace sustainable energy solutions. Looking ahead, Pakistan targets to increase its clean energy share to over 90% by 2035. At the same time, efforts to digitize the power system are well underway. Pakistan is deploying advanced metering infrastructure and modernizing ICT frameworks to improve reliability, reduce losses, and enhance transparency. This shift towards digital energy governance is essential for enabling a modern smart grid capable of accommodating higher shares of renewables. Other major reforms of power sector include privatization of DISCOs to improve efficiency, sale of redundant power plants, reduction in industrial tariff to enhance competitiveness, support exports and stimulate economic growth, launch of the surplus power package to fully utilize available generation capacity, launch of the appointment of competent and independent DISCO boards, reforms in the net metering regulations, significant reduction in circular debt, digitization of distribution networks through large-scale deployment of smart meters and SCADA systems, launch of a consumer self-reading metering app by the name Apna Meter, establishment of the 118 helpline, a standardized and responsive national platform for complaint resolution, creation of the first technical arm at the power division in the form of PPMC, restructuring of the national transmission system, solarization of agriculture tubers in Balochistan, electrification of strategic regions like Gawadar and Gilgit through targeted solarization programs to improve energy access and security, operationalization of the competitive wholesale energy market to promote transparency, competition, and investor confidence, reduction in the EV charging tariffs to encourage electric mobility and support the national decarbonization agenda, early retirement of fossil fuel plants, which Pakistan did on its own. We did not wait for help to come from up north. But unfortunately, the international community and the financiers for green energy and transition towards green energy still did not recognize that in the form of financing to be made available for the transition. We had to bear the cost and the consequences of it ourselves. The implementation of the energy conservation building codes in building authorities to optimize energy efficiency in the construction sector have been another landmark achievement by the government. Other reforms that collectively contribute to building a modern, resilient, and consumer-centric power sector are well underway. In the end, I extend my sincere gratitude to the Pakistan Renewable Energy Coalition, LUMS, Energy Institute, and Alliance for Climate Justice and Clean Energy for organizing this landmark summit, and to our partners, development agencies, and participants for their continued commitment to Asia's clean energy future. Let this summit be a platform not only to share knowledge and experiences, but also to forge collective action, strengthen South-South cooperation, and accelerate a future where clean, affordable, and resilient energy empowers our people, secures our economies, and protects our planet. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister Saab, for your words. Slido का QR code जरा display कर दीजिएगा, please. Minister Saab, we will have a brief question answer session. And requested to scan this QR code. And you guys can type in and send in your questions. Meanwhile, Minister Saab,
would the questions show on the screen?
I would be mentioning those questions to you, but I have one or two things in my mind that for the past few years we have seen that the share of renewables hasn't increased at the utility scale. We can see that it's stuck at around 5 or 6% for past many years. What obstacles do you see that why this share hasn't increased, and what's the plan of the Energy Ministry to tackle this issue?
Well, frankly speaking, Pakistan never had a proper integrated generation expansion plan. We never overlaid the transmission expansion plan onto the IGCEP to give clarity to us in terms of the policy interventions required in terms of acquiring and procuring more power. So our government did that for the first time in the past 18 months. And this IGSEP, what we call this IGSEP overlaid by the Transmission Expansion Plan, which is TSEP, this gives us complete clarity on where we are expected to go in terms of additional power that the grid might require. The first thing to note is that Pakistan now has evolved or has made its transition into an environment where the government would not be procuring any more powers centrally. So the government would not be the purchaser of power onto the grid in the future, and competitive energy markets with business to business transactions would be actually making these decisions on a least cost competitive basis. So whatever we are expecting now through the CTBCM framework and the transition that the B2B users would be making in the in the near future would all be renewable because of the cost effect of it all. That's the first thing. If we add on more utility scale solar or wind power right now as we speak, that will be overall increasing the power purchase price of the grid, making it economically unsustainable. But as the IGSEP goes along over the next about 8 to 10 years, there is space for distributed solar generation of over 6,000 megawatts, and wind energy is being picked up by the system over the next few years in different parts of the country. So our clean energy mix is absolutely fine as we speak today, and it's going to improve in the future. Pakistanis should be proud of the fact that we as a country, our national grid is one of the cleanest in the world. We should be proud of that, and we are moving towards cleaner energy in the future through hydro, solar, and wind utility scale investments that are expected to happen between the businesses themselves.
All right. Thank you, Minister Saab. Now we have a list of questions for you. The first one is that what strategy has the ministry applied to measure solar PV installations in Pakistan?
Well, our PPMC, our technical arm is in touch with other development partners, but we've been able to put into place a very transparent mechanism with the best available tools globally. And our assessment is that our on and off the grid solar installations in Pakistan, a very conservative estimate is are close to about 20 gigawatts. Some say it's a lot more, but the proper tools that we have been able to use give us an estimate of close to 20 gigawatts.
जी ठीक है, इसको स्क्रॉल कीजिएगा जरा, एक मिनट रुक जाए. Minister Saab, the next question is how does government plan on handling the increased rate of private sector going off grid?
Well, by reducing the prices of power on grid, I think the people-led distributed solar revolution, more than the policies of the government in terms of having lowered the tariffs for import of such equipment. Other than that, I think the high prices of power on the grid have really pushed people to invest into this technology, and that's why Pakistan is actually proud of the fact that it's a people-led revolution that we've seen. So as the price of power on the grid continues to come down, we will have less incentive for people to go off the grid. And that's what we have been working on. And the capacity payments that the grid is burdened with in the form of investments that we made in the past 5 to 8 years, and the devaluation of the rupee and higher interest rates that have actually been what have broken our back in terms of prices. And we're expecting to look at different options of debt swap and maybe fiscalization of the capacity part of the national grid price. And once we bring that down, hopefully the transition would be much slower than what we've seen in the past.
जी ठीक है, Minister साहब, एक और चीज कि there is a lot of talk about technical transfer and joint ventures and ventures for localizing the renewable technologies in Pakistan. But the main hurdle is that we need to provide concessional energy tariffs to the industry. So what's the ministry's take on this issue?
Well, the industry needs to be the competitive in terms of its imports, especially if the industry wants to be export oriented. We are trying to bring down the industrial tariff. It's already been brought down by about 16 rupees in the past 18 months per kilowatt hour. But that's not enough. We are still in the range of about 12.5 cents per kilowatt hour. This should be close to about 8.5 to 9 cents. And I just did mention to you different strategy points that need to be put into place in the form of a debt swap for capacity payments and fiscalization of that part of the national energy price. So let's hope we're able to implement that soon enough after arranging for financing for that. And then once that happens, that will help the industry to get more efficient. But we can't really just subsidize the industry right now because of our IMF constraints. In fact, the industry is actually cross-subsidizing other consumers on the grid. So that needs to be waived off to make it more rational for them.
ठीक है. Minister साहब, एक burning question है. Is there a possibility of decentralizing energy regulation and planning at provincial level?
Well, there is a constitutional provision that allows provinces to regulate the electricity sector as long as it's not connected to the grid. But there are some fault lines between the constitution and the Electricity Act that we have. So we're looking at those fault lines in order to set those in order and for consistency to actually kick in within the constitutional framework and the acts and laws that we have at the federal and provincial level. So we should be going to the CCI and the parliament with that soon. So we're trying to remove those inconsistencies. At the moment, the Sindh, the province of Sindh does have the legislation that supports the creation of the Sindh Electric Power Regulatory Authority, but the jurisdiction of that and whatever it can do is still under question. So we should be discussing that amongst ourselves and get it over with soon.
All right. Minister Saab, there is a lot of hue and cry and debate on net metering policy, but the question is quite simple. Will the new net metering policy be consumer friendly?
It has always been consumer friendly. It will continue to be consumer friendly, but depends on what you call consumer friendly. Do the 450,000 net metering owners have the right to be a burden on the rest of the grid? No. Does anybody in this country, including IPPs, who we went through renegotiations of contracts and have rationalized the power purchasing price from those IPPs, did they have the right to make the grid unsustainable and economically not viable? No, that's why we did it. I think the net metering users and owners can still, through post new regulations, still have very good payback periods for them to keep investing into such systems. But these payback periods need to be rationalized. We can't expect them to be paid windfall profits by the rest of the grid consumers and their paybacks to be less than a year and a half. So we're planning to rationalize that very soon. I think we've been weak and not have had the political will to take the country through painful reforms, but this is much required. I think the windfall profits that the net metering owners are getting right now are not economically sustainable, and we are expected to revise them in the very near future.
जी ठीक है. One more question, Minister Saab. And by the way, thank you so much for being so patient with all these questions. अब सवाल ये है कि जी CTBCM और ये जो मार्केट है एनर्जी मार्केट, ये हमें फाइनली ऑपरेशनल हालत में कब मिलेगी?
सर हमने सारी स्टेक होल्डर्स के साथ और इंडस्ट्री के साथ इंटरैक्ट कर चुके हैं, हमारे सेमिनार्स हो चुके हैं, इंटरैक्टिव सेशंस हो चुके हैं. मैंने कैबिनेट कमेटी ऑन एनर्जी के अंदर मूव कर लिया है एज ऑफ डे बिफोर yesterday. The moment the cabinet committee on energy approves that, which should be early next week, मेरे ख्याल में हमारा जो first auction of the 200 megawatts है for competitive suppliers to get the right to do this should be done well within the first quarter of the next calendar year. So आपको तकरीबन फरवरी मार्च तक ये competitive जो markets हैं ये operationalized ऑक्शन के प्रोसेस के जरिए हो जाएंगी. वो लोग कब अपने सिस्टम्स को लेके आते हैं और B2B transactions, we've given them a time to do so within the first 3 years after they win the contracts. So I think the private sector is efficient enough and is quick enough to do it. So I'm expecting that to happen much before that.
जी ठीक है. Thank you so much, Minister Saab, for your address, for answering all these questions. बहुत शुक्रिया आपका आपके ज्वाइन
आप
करने.
सबकी बहुत मेहरबानी and I apologize once again for not being there. Thank you.
बहुत शुक्रिया. Ubaid, is it the time to announce the lunch break? The most favorite announcement, I guess. At 1:50? Okay, all right. So guys, now we are gonna go for lunch and we are gonna reconvene here at 1:50. आप लोग प्लीज ये हाँ मैं बता देता हूँ. आप लोग प्लीज वो प्लेनरी सेशन के कर देते हैं डिस्प्ले. हाँ आप सब लोगों के यहाँ जाने से पहले कुछ 2-3 इंपॉर्टेंट अनाउंसमेंट्स हैं, वो प्लीज सुनते जाइएगा. We will have 3 breakout sessions. One of the session would take place in this very auditorium. 2 of the sessions will take place in the rooms across this auditorium. You guys can choose the session of your choice and your expertise. इसके अलावा एक और important चीज कि lunch executive dining hall में होगा. Is it? Okay. So lunch will be in executive dining hall. Anything else? अगर आप वो please करवा दें. All right. So, okay, all right. So the banners of each session, we have placed the placards at the door of each room. All right. So just by the way, the session 2 in the agenda will take place in this auditorium. It's about the it's better that I tell it now. It's about reforming the UN framework in light of Moti Rao framework for Global South, and all of the other 2 sessions, they will take place in the other rooms. Enjoy your lunch. Thank you. 150 का बार बार कहा जा रहा है जी. 150 पे प्लीज वापस आ जाइए.